everybody. In our last video going through the Vue documentation, we ended with composing components, and we worked through a simple example of displaying a list of to-dos. The data for that list came from a parent component, and the data was passed into a child component that would display each list item. If you didn't watch that video, I recommend you go back because we're going to start building on what we learned in that video. If you haven't done so yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We will be going through all of the Vue documentation, among other things, and I don't want you to miss any updates. So click that subscribe button right now. The code for this video is on GitHub, and I've put the link down below. Make sure you clone that and you work alongside of me so you can learn better. Let's take a look at that right now. So opening up our code editor, the file you want to go to is the composing components.html. This is found on the composing components branch. So make sure you check out that branch. If you're on the master branch, you'll need to check out this branch. The completed code will be found on composing components completed. Okay, so let's get started by just getting a quick look at what we have here. I brought in Bootstrap because by the end of the video, we'll have worked through the simple example in the documentation, but we'll also bring over one of the Bootstrap templates and put that together in different components as well to get more practice. So I'm just bringing in Bootstrap, the CSS file up at the top, and down below we need things like jQuery and the Bootstrap JavaScript, etc. And of course Vue down at the bottom. So we'll work within this HTML section right here, and then the empty script tags down at the bottom. This is where we'll be doing our work. So let's jump over to the documentation now and take a look at the basic example that we're given here as what it may look like when we're using different components and putting them together to make a page. So I already have the app wrapper here, so I'll just grab everything between and we'll paste that in here. And you can see that we have 4 different components. We have the app nav, the view, the sidebar, and the content. So let's begin by creating those components, and then we'll mount our main Vue instance so everything will get on the page. So our four components we can create with view.component, and we start by passing in a name for this component. So we'll do app nav. Actually, I'll just keep it short. No, app nav. It has to match what's up here. The second argument is the options object, and the only thing we'll put on that right now is the template property. So this is what will spit out our actual HTML. Now you have to remember that the template property must return a single root element. And it doesn't matter how much you have between that, but the root, it has to be a single root element. I cannot do this. I can't have 2 divs like so, then that would be 2 root elements. Can't do that. Have to have a single one. And then right here in the middle, you can put whatever you want. So we'll put our app nav right here. And I'll create 3 others. We have our app view, our sidebar, and our content. And now we have to actually instantiate our root view instance. So let's say we can hold that in our app constant, and we call new view. And what we pass into the new view constructor is the options object. So first we have to say what element on the page do we want to mount to? And we want to mount to this element right here. And we can hook into its ID, and we have the ID is equal to app. So we use the hash to denote that it's an ID we're hooking into, and we'll use app like so. And we don't need anything else right now. We don't need a template. We don't need data or anything like that. So we'll just use the bare minimum right here. Now when we open up this page in our browser, we can see we have app nav and app view, but we're missing 2 things. We're missing the sidebar and the content. How do we tell Vue that we want them on the page? Well, you'll notice that sidebar and content are nested within the app view component. And to get the nested content to actually display, we have to use something called slots. Now you can do a lot with slots. It's kind of a big topic, but right now I'll show you the very basic bare minimum. And the way we do that is within the app view component template, we use the tag slot like so to show Vue where we want to put our nested information, our nested content. So right here I have it below app view. So that means our sidebar and our content should now be showing below our app view text. And I'll refresh and there it is. Now if I move app view to after, like this, then they'll be reversed now. So refresh that and you see our content, our sidebar and content are now above the view. So that's how that works. If you want to have some default information that will show up if there's nothing slotted in, if there's no nested components, then the default will be used. We'll just write default here. If I refresh, you'll see that there is no default right now. But as soon as I remove our nested components from the HTML, then now our default shows. You can see it right there. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Slots are really fun to use, and we'll definitely get a lot more in depth with them as we go forward. So for now, this is good. I encourage you now to pause it, play around a little bit, see if you can create some more components and see what you can do with that. Add in some CSS and maybe even create a basic page with like a header and a footer. Go ahead and try that. And once you play around a little bit and you come back, we'll go through one of the Bootstrap templates, a pretty well-known one, the Jumbotron template. So pause right now, play around a little bit, and then come on back. Okay, now that you're back, let's take a look at Jumbotron. So we have the Jumbotron template here. The link is down below the video. So we have a basic navigation on the top. Down below we have the Jumbotron section, and then we have a row, a container. If you're familiar with Bootstrap at all, we have a container here with a row and 3 columns within that. So we're going to spit all of this out onto the page now using Vue component. To see the HTML behind what you're looking at here, you just go to View Page Source, and we'll start by grabbing our nav HTML right here, which is just below the opening body tag. And we'll jump to our code. Let's turn our app nav into our new nav component. So we have our root element now is our nav tag. It's not a div anymore, it's just a nav tag. And I'm going to go back to our example to make sure that this is actually showing properly. There we go. So we have our navigation, and because I've already brought in Bootstrap CSS and JavaScript, this is working just fine. Now we need a Jumbotron. So with wrapping the Jumbotron and our container with our 3 columns, we have a main element. So we need to grab all of this and divide it up a little bit. So we'll grab main as our wrapper, and I'll turn this app view into an app main. So go down to app view, change this to app main, and I'll put it right here, and I'll close it off. Now because the main is a wrapper, we need our slot here. So we make sure that our new Jumbotron and our container row, when we put that in there, that's going to show up properly. So we have to use our slot, like so. And now up here we can put our actual Jumbotron and our row. So we'll put, let's see, we'll change the sidebar to Jumbotron. And then below that we'll have our container. And within container we'll nest yet again, and we'll use app column like that. This is what we want it to look like, and we'll have 3 of them. So let's create our container and our column components. So we'll change sidebar to container. And what does that look like? Let's see. Container and a row div. And then within those 2 divs, we have our columns. So I'm going to grab this. And see if I can make it a little bit easier on the eyes. Here we have our slots. And then I'll close off that row and close off that container. So that's what that will look like. Now, so slot will grab our columns, and we'll change content to our column. And let's get our code for the columns right here. Reformat this a little bit. There we go. Now, let's see, we have 3 of them. So let's refresh our page and make sure that everything is showing up properly. Oh, I forgot the Jumbotron. Let's grab our Jumbotron, which is right here. Again, this is a single root element. App Jumbotron. Let's create that up here. There we go. App Jumbotron. Pass in our options object with our template and paste that in. Reformat that a little bit. There we go. Now we'll refresh and we have everything right there. So we have our 3 columns, our Jumbotron, our nav. And when you're looking at these columns, you notice that we're using the same component 3 times. Of course, we don't want to have the same content 3 times. So we can use props to pass in the data that we want to customize this component. So let's jump back here and we'll go up here, and you may recall from the first video, again, if you haven't seen it, you will want to review it. We'll create a special attribute on the app column component tag here that will serve as a property, a prop down in the app column component, and we can pass in our unique data that way. So let's call this heading. Let's change the heading first, and we'll just call this heading 1. Now I'm not binding this. I'm not doing vbind heading, and I'm not using the short form either with just a colon there. So because I'm not doing that, what I'm passing in here is received as a string. If I were to bind this to something, then it would expect that the parent component would have a property on it called heading 1, and then it would bind to the value of that. But we're not using vbind here for various reasons that I'll go over in a moment. So we're just passing in a simple string, and we'll put heading 3. Now the reason I'm not binding the heading attribute to any data on the parent app container is because we're using a slot to render the app column component through the parent container. So because we're using slots, there's no direct connection between the app container and the app column. Therefore, passing data through won't work right away. We have to use something called a scope slot, and that's beyond the scope of this video today. So right now, we're just going to stick with something simple and just use strings for our attribute values. Now, in our app column component, we have to set that up to receive this prop that's being passed down. So we have to go down here to our component definition, and recall we set up props. We can do it 2 ways. We can do it as an array of strings, or we can set it up as an object. I like to use the object because then we can use prop validation to make sure that we're receiving the data that we want. So we're waiting for the heading, which corresponds to what we put here as our attribute. And we want our heading to be of type string. We're expecting a string here, and we will make it required. So that way, if we ever miss it, then we'll get a warning in our console, and that'll let us know that something's wrong with our code. And let's set up a default as well. And we'll set up default heading, just like that. So now if any of these are not set, so if I just forget to set it one time, we'll have the default heading and our warning. So we'll have both. So now that we refresh this, we should see heading 1, heading 2, and heading 3. I nearly forgot one thing. We have to take this out, and we have access to our heading now with our curly braces, just like that. So let's refresh. Now we have heading 1, 2, and 3. We are reusing this component with unique data now. Now what about content? Well, it's kind of cool. We can put some content right here if we want. And then what would we have to do to get that content to show up in the app column component? Pause it right now and see if you can figure it out. Add some text right here in between our app column tags, and I want that to show up on the screen instead of what's down here. How would you do that? Okay, give it a pause and try, and come back when you're done. Okay, could you figure it out? Well, let's try it step by step. I want to add some content here. This is my content, and I want it to show up on the page now. So let's try this. Refresh. No content. Why not? Well, we already covered this. You need a slot. So we'll go down here, and we'll set up a slot. Now it should show up. This is my content. But I don't want both. I want to have default content. So how do I do that? Simply grab this, put it within the slot tag, and now that is your default. So whenever something is passed in, this will not be used. But if nothing is passed in, which is the case with our 2 and 3 heading sections, then the default will be used. So there we go. We have this is my content, and then we have our default content right here. Now with the tools that you have now, you can do some pretty interesting things with Vue. Let's try another challenge. I want to reuse our Jumbotron component, and I want to be able to customize the title, the text beneath the title, as well as the button text, and even the link that the button points to. So those are 4 things. I want to customize title, content, the button text, as well as the link for the button. So how would you do that? You might want to look in the documentation about binding to attributes, and you can bind to all sorts of attributes, including an href attribute. So that's the only hint I'm going to give. Pause it right now and give it a shot, and when you're done, come on back and we'll work through it together. Did you get it working? Let's try it together. Let's start with the Jumbotron title. So what we'll need is a special attribute, just like we did with heading here, and we'll just call it title. And we want to set this to our new title. So we'll just put Hello Jumbotron. That is our new title. But we have to set up our Jumbotron component to receive that title. And what do we use for that? We use props. So Jumbotron is right here. We'll set up a new props property. And we are looking for our title. And that will be a type string. We will make it required. And let's set a default like so. Can't forget that. Put our title in our curly braces. Now refresh. Here we go. Hello Jumbotron. Now we want to customize the content. And probably the easiest way to do this is to just slot it in. Rather than putting a content attribute here, putting a long string right here within the tag, it's probably easier to use a slot. So let's do that. Go down here, we'll grab our content. I don't want to grab the button right now. And we use a slot. And we'll go up here and put the content right in there, just like so. Now we might want some default content, so let's just put it here. And let's test that out. We should have our text still here. No change. Good. But let's remove our text and our default should show up instead. And that works as expected. Good. Now we want to customize the button. So let's start with the button text. One thing to be aware of, the way we're working with Vue right now is just with the CDN link. So if you do an attribute with a camel case, it won't work. So I started by writing button text like this. And let's see, click here. Let's try that. And we'll see what's wrong with what I just did. Let's go to, where are we? Jumbotron, there we go. Let's wire up our button text. Type string, required true, default button text. And then down here in our template, of course, button text. There we go. And you'll see here when we refresh this that it will not work. So I'll go back here, I'll refresh, and we have our default button text. Let's see what's going on. In our console, yep, we have an error, missing required prop button text, which is weird because I thought we set it. Now the answer to this little head scratcher is that HTML doesn't like camel case like that for its attributes. We actually have to change this to kebab case like that with a hyphen. So button hyphen text, that will match up with what we've written down here with camel case. And you can find that here in the documentation under components, camel case props, camel case versus kebab case. It explains it right here. So you want to take a look at that. And now that we've made that change, when we refresh, it should work just fine. So now we have our click here text, which I put right up there. I can change this to learn more, and that works just fine. Now we need to change the link that our button goes to. So let's go up here to our component and we'll set up a new attribute for button link. And let's set this to Google. Go down here, we have to wire that up in our props object. Button link. Type is also a string. Required, we'll do true. And default, we'll just set this to a hash. So to bind to the href, what we need to do here is use a colon as a short form for vbind, v-bind colon. Okay, you can use either. It's totally up to you. And now when we bind this, the value for href expects not a string, but a property on the component. So our property is button link. And we've set this to google.com. So the default should not be used. When we click this, we should go to Google. And here we are at Google now. So that works as expected. If I take this out, if I don't set it, so button link will now be undefined. I'll refresh that. When I click this now, oh, see, I'm getting a warning. That's required, remember, so I get a nice warning in my console. When I click this, it won't go anywhere. If you hover over it, you can see that the link goes to the hash symbol. So that's working as expected too. So now we've set up our Jumbotron component to be used across multiple different contexts, so different pages perhaps. So that's pretty handy now. So let's try the next challenge, challenge number 2. Looking at our page again, I would like you to set up the app column to be able to not just take a customized header and content, which we've already done, but also size. So right now we have it hard-coded to be 3 columns. So these are size 4. So that's a 12 grid column, and each one is a width of 4. But what if we want to change it? What if we want 4 columns, not just 3? How would you do that? Give that a try, and then when you're done, come on back and we'll go through it together. Did you get it to work? Since we just learned how to bind to the href attribute, we can use that same sort of setup to bind to a class. So let's go back here and we'll take a look at our column template. And you'll see that each column has a class of column MD4. Now I want to bind to this and be able to set it as I wish. So let's make that blank and we'll go up here to our columns and we'll set up a new attribute. How about we'll call it, let's see, grid class, or I should say call class, column class. And we want this to be column MD4, so medium column width 4. I'll put this on all 3. And we'll go down here. Now I've already removed it from my class right here. So now when I refresh the page, I haven't wired up the prop just yet. This should break our layout. So when I refresh, you'll see that our layout is broken. There's no longer a column set up. So set up our prop for column class. This will be an object again, type string required. Let's set this to false this time, just to change it up a bit. And we'll set our column class, column medium 4 to be a default. Now, how do you bind to a class? Well, the same way we bound to the href attribute, we can use our colon or vbind colon to bind to class. And we'll set this to column class, just like that. So now our layout should be fixed to be the way it was before. Now we have our 3 columns. Well, let's try 4. Let's make another one. So that would be MD3 because 12 divided by 4 is 3. So now each column will be a width of 3. And now we have our 4 columns. What if we want to do 2? Well, you can guess that this will be MD6, and we don't need these 2. Comment those out, and we should have 2 columns now. So now our column component is pretty flexible as well. Not bad. Now, if you have any questions about anything we've covered today, please don't hesitate to put a comment down below the video. If this helped you, I'd like to hear about that too. I appreciate all thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you catch all future videos. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.